Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dan Powers, Executive Director of the Society for Science at User Research Facilities, and I want to welcome you to a webinar that we are having today with Dr. Vanessa Chan. Before we get started, I want to give a little background on the Office of Technology Transitions, where she's a director at the U.S. Department of Energy, and also invite all of our audience to submit any ideas to SURF about the topics or speakers that you might like to see in future webinars. SURF is a network of the user research facilities. These are particular scientific research labs across the country, mostly under the umbrella of Department of Energy, but also within other federal agencies and born of National Science Foundation funding, that are meant to connect with academics and private sector technologists, engineers, scientists of all kinds to leverage the staff and the resources within these laboratories to help with research and to help manifest discoveries and turn them into solutions that go out into the world and help improve humanity. So with that, as part of the network of SURF, one of our missions, or part of our mission, is to help share insight from those leaders within this network on just what's going on and working well, and where continued opportunities lie for people to plug in and take advantage of this massive network that we've invested in as a country. So today we're going to hear from Dr. Vanessa Chan. She is the Chief Commercialization Officer for the Department of Energy and the Director of the Office of Technology Transitions. The Office of Technology Transition serves as the central hub for technology transfer activities across the Department of Energy's extensive research and development enterprise. From artificial intelligence and cybersecurity research to advanced manufacturing and quantum computing to medical diagnostics and climate change research, the OTT works to ensure groundbreaking scientific discoveries achieve their maximum public return and impact. And with a mission to advance the economic, energy, and national security interests of the United States, the OTT strives to streamline access to user facilities at 17 Department of Energy national labs and sites, and the DOE's world-class scientific researchers and their sprawling portfolio of intellectual property. Is a good use of the word sprawling. Broad spectrum of intellectual property that fosters strong internal and external partnerships that guide innovations from the lab towards the marketplace. So hearing from Dr. Chan today, just a little bit of her background. She is an innovator who has worked across a wide range of ecosystems, from academia to Fortune 1000 companies to startups. She has 2 decades of experience helping organizations grow at the interface of technology and business across a diverse set of industries. She is currently on leave of absence from her position as undergraduate chair of the Materials Science and Engineering Department at the Jonathan and Linda Brasington Professor of Practice and Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the University of Pennsylvania School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. Yes, thank you for taking a break from that realm of activity to be working on behalf of the whole country with the Department of Energy. Real quick, she also earned her PhD in Materials Science and Engineering from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and her BSc and Materials Science and Engineering from University of Pennsylvania. And there's much more, as you might imagine, to her biography, but I'll give you, leave you with that as some of the background. And let me turn this over now to Dr. Chan.
Perfect. Thank you for having me. And Dan, you can be my PR person. That was awesome. I appreciate that. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. I thought I'd run you guys through a couple of things today. First was to help define what is commercialization. It's one of those squishy terms that everybody uses. So I thought it'd be helpful to discuss what that is. Then talk a little about how we're trying to move technologies through the RDD&D Continuum. So that's research to development, demonstration, deployment, and some of the barriers we're trying to overcome. And then give you a little bit of a sneak preview of the kinds of activities and work that we do at OTT to really help drive commercialization. And I'll be open for any questions that the audience might have after that. So in terms of what is commercialization, at its simplest form, it's really about trying to bring an idea, oftentimes from the lab, all the way to market. And the question becomes, what can we actually do to increase the odds that the work that we're doing in a lab can actually make it to the marketplace, so that users like you and I are seeing the impact of the research endeavors that are being done. And so to do this, it's important to have a market pull, right? So for the market to guide the research that we're doing, just as we're pushing the technology out the door. And if we can do this in a synergistic way, this is how you can lead to commercial impact. And it's really important to note that commercialization is not linear. Anyone who has tried to commercialize technology knows that. You'll take one step forward, two steps forward, and have to take one step back. But that's okay. That's the nature of innovation. And ultimately, when you're trying to get to commercial viability, we have to focus not just on whether or not the technology works, because oftentimes that is where technologists will focus. We also have to understand what is the commercial viability. What are the economics of this solution? And is it something which the private sector is willing to take on? So if you have a very expensive technology, which in the end consumers are not willing to pay for, you'll never get to commercialization. And so this is a really important point to make. In terms of how we move DOE technologies through to market, I talked about this continuum, which is research to development to demonstration deployment. And you'll see it's presented as linear, but you'll always kind of get this feedback loop, because as you learn new things in more advanced stages, you may need to go back to the drawing board or a couple steps back to get to where you need to get to. But ultimately in research, this is when you start exploring a concept or idea in the lab. You're doing some lab scale experiments to show a potential value proposition of a materials, for example. So let's say the work I'm working on is to develop new materials to help more efficiently convert solar energy into electricity. I may come up as a researcher with a new idea of a material, and I'll do some research in the lab to see if that material has promise. You then, if you feel that you've got a material system that shows a lot of promise, you move to the next stage, which is development. And this is when you start designing and building proof of concepts and working prototypes. So in the case of this material, you may build a small solar cell to actually see, can you make this material work in an actual little system? And you start doing some experiments to see whether or not you can actually test the value proposition and validate it. You then move on to demonstration, which is when you start scaling, right? You start getting that little prototype and getting to more of a pre-commercial pilot scale. You're trying to drive some more of that functionality. And so, for example, we're talking about solar cells. How does that connect into the grid? If you're going to also create something which is new from a solar standpoint, does it have the weatherability that you need because it's going to be sitting out there in the sun for a long time, or does the material degrade, right, over time? So there's a lot of things that you're going to be doing the demonstration phase in order to get us to the next step, which is deployment. And deployment is really when you have shown the technology works, but even more importantly, you've put it into a system that is actually able to be plugged into the existing ecosystem. And even more importantly, is that it's economically viable. If you really want to get at scale commercial deployment, then that means the private sector has to be able to take over. And that means that the economics have to be viable and that the supply chain is willing to stand itself up in order to support this technology to make it to the marketplace, and that the private sector actually has a business model that is sustainable. And one thing to note is that throughout the entire commercialization process, so as you move across the RDD&D Continuum, you will continually have high risk all the way through the demonstration phase. It really isn't until deployment, when you've worked out all the kinks in the technology, you have a business model that is scalable, that you really see this risk decrease significantly. And the reason why this is important is, as a result, there will be things that don't work on this commercialization journey. You may need to say, I got as far as I could and I'm getting to the demonstration phase, and look, this material degrades after a year and a half in the sun. That is not going to work. This is not going to work as a product. And then you then have to shut it down and pivot to the next one. And so that's okay. That's the nature of innovation. And these are the kinds of things that you have to realize. And as you look at driving towards commercialization, moving across the continuum, having done a lot of work over the past 20 years, trying to commercialize technology, both in startups, as well as in massive, large private sector companies, as well as in academia, there's kind of 5 themes that I've seen that impede commercialization. And really what we're doing here at OTT is to address these barriers so that we can increase our odds of actually being able to commercialize. So the first is around capabilities. I have a PhD from MIT, and I was trained at MIT to be very deep in research and technology, which is great. That is the foundation for innovation, is the amazing work our researchers do. However, we don't have any formal training in commercial impact. So nowhere do we learn about the real world, the ecosystems, value chains, and value propositions And I think it's important to be able to build that out even in undergraduates, because if you have a better awareness of how technology is used and what value propositions are, that can really help inform the type of research you're doing to ensure that we are doing market pull and not technology push when we do our research. And so building out these capabilities is really critical. We also do not normally assess market risk in a systematic way. And that is pretty typical for most science-based organizations. They focus on technology stage gate processes. And so we're building out tools right now to actually explicitly manage market adoption risk, because you need the ecosystem behind you in order to get you there. A second barrier that is common in technology commercialization is funding challenges across the continuum. Especially things like prototyping, right? Are we able to get national labs the prototyping funds they need to get us to the development stage? And then universally across all technology commercialization ecosystems, it's oftentimes very hard to get money for demonstration and first-in-kind deployment. And the reason why is the risk is still high, but the amount of money you need is significantly higher than in the previous phases. And so therefore capital oftentimes can be a bit risk averse, and it's hard to get the money for that. A third thing that is also very important is collaboration. And everyone in the ecosystems needs to strategically collaborate with each other and not just work on a certain research project, but to think more about some of the important collaborations that we have. And this is especially important in a place like DOE, where we have billions of dollars every year, but the private sector has trillions. And if we're going to actually get ourselves to the point where we can hit our climate goals, we have to understand how do our billions actually help to activate the trillions. And another thing that's really important is we need to make sure that there's mechanisms to encourage researchers to engage with the external community. Oftentimes researchers may be very focused on their research. That's what they love to do in the labs. I know I was the same way. And so you may feel like, interacting with the external community in the market may not be part of your mandate. And so really helping to drive that is important. Next is around culture. Oftentimes labs in academia will emphasize papers more than the commercialization outcomes. When you get your PhD, it's important to publish in refereed journals. And so it's really around how do we find the balance between having both papers and commercialization outcomes both be important. And we mentioned a little bit about the cultural concerns that demonstrations are risky. People have to be educated. That's just the nature of the beast, and that's okay. And some things won't work, and that's not a failure on the researchers or the team. It's just the nature of innovation. You're pushing the envelope of where technology will go, and sometimes it just doesn't work. And then lastly, a barrier is around contracting. Sometimes people find it difficult to negotiate with other parties. DOE is the same way. And so what can we do to really make sure the contracting mechanisms are not so cumbersome? And so these are the 5 barriers that we've really identified. And what we're trying to do is understand what are the things and we can do here at OTT to help address many of these barriers. And I'm going to show a handful of the programs that we have at OTT to do that. First is building out capabilities in our national labs. So we have a wonderful program called Energy ICorps that is led out of the Office of Technology Transitions. And we work with the 17 national labs to actually drive and teach their researchers about commercialization. So they spend 2 months, half of their time taking the project they're on and starting to understand what the value proposition is. They actually cold call the market, understand what is the existing problems, talk about their technology solutions, and then really try to use that to augment and inform the work that they're doing. And as you can see from the numbers, we've had a lot of different teams come through it. We've had a lot of different innovations come through it. And what we find after graduating from this program is the researchers have a much better understanding of how to guide their research so that actually can have an impact in the market, because they spoke to the market to understand what the value proposition is that they have to deliver. Next, we have a program called the Technology Commercialization Fund, and it was really created to help drive funding and partnerships with our national labs. And so recently, we just announced the award of $65 million in funding, $30 million came from the federal funds and $35 million from private sector. And 68 projects were funded across 12 national labs in partnerships with 70 different entities. And really what we're doing right now is looking to make sure that we're able to drive towards the collaboration that we need so we can commercialize many of our lab technologies. And going to collaboration, there's another program that we're very proud of, which is the Energy Program for Innovation Clusters. So startups play an absolute critical role in trying to activate the energy ecosystem. And through EPIC, which is a $5 million amount of money that OTT has every year given to us by Congress, we're supporting incubators across the country. And so far we funded 30 different awardees across the nation. And you'll see it's a pretty great distribution in terms of geography. And the idea is each of these incubators and the support from DOE will catalyze their region to really start stimulating the formation of energy hardware development in other ecosystems. Very excited about something we just launched, which is the Energy Tech University Prize. So if there's any students out there, we're still accepting applications. And the idea here is take a look at the Department of Energy technologies that we have in the national labs and come up with a business plan, right, that you could use to actually try to commercialize the technology. And so it's something where we have bonus prizes also from 7 different offices. And so there's a $250,000 total in cash prizes, which is a lot of money, especially if you're a student. And so if you get a chance, go to our website. You go to the OTT website and you'll see right there a link to the Energy Tech Up, which you can go after. And then lastly, there's a wonderful tool that OTT runs, which is a lab partnering service tool. It's at labpartnering.org. And the key thing here that we're trying to do is make sure you guys have transparency around all the work that we've done here in national labs. So by doing keyword searches, we can give you summaries of technologies and the spaces that you are interested in. You can get access to 40,000 plus patents that are associated with DOE. And you also can contact researchers and find facilities that you could use related to the work that you're interested in. And so this is a way that we are trying to drive collaboration connections back into the ecosystem. And so that gives you a little bit of a sense of where are we trying to really drive some of the work to overcome these barriers. But ultimately what we really are trying to do is invert the pathway of the arrow. So the way in which I normally do commercialization is I start and think about deployment and go backwards. So what does the market need, right, in order for us to be able to do something better? So in every single market, there's some type of incumbent technology solution. And you have to ask yourself, what are the current issues with that technology? What are the gaps? And what would make it better? You have to understand the economics of the current technology so that you understand what are the economics that you have to hit, because all of us know as users, we don't want to pay more for something. We always want to pay less. And so you have to make sure that the economics are going to make sense for the consumer and the end market. And then really asking ourselves, given all of that, what is the research and development we want to do given what the market is asking from us? And so really that's the approach we're taking here, to go from deployment backwards to help guide research and development. So that's basically it from our side in terms of giving you guys a little bit of a taste of the kind of stuff that we're doing here at OTT, and happy to open this up to questions.
Great, okay, thank you. That is both concise and very sophisticated, the scope of details that you are getting into and the spectrum of the different programs that OTT is working on that you're overseeing is robust and impressive. This is very easy to absorb, I believe, as an audience member and find out where personally or where a given organization can plug in. I wonder if you could also make a reference to the is it the technology working group? I'm not getting the technology transfer working group. What is that entity and how do they play into those efforts that you were just describing?
So this is such an important group for us here at OTT. It's basically anyone in DOE that is working on technology transfer. And they interact with us to really help us think about what are the challenges that are preventing us from commercializing our technologies. And every year we stand up some subcommittees to help us work on things that are important to help us address these barriers. And so it's something where the more the merrier. And so we really try hard to get input from the folks who are doing all the hard work on the ground of trying to commercialize things.
Right. That's another resource that the audience members can check out if they would like. If you have questions, please put them into the chat function here, and I can share them up to Dr. Chan. And let me double check here. I'm just looking into the chat. Also wanted to ask if you could give an example of the EPIC program and the notion of creating some, in essence, regional clusters, or what they are then any given awardee to the EPIC program, what it is that they have as their charge.
Yeah, so really the EPIC program is one where, there's amount of money that they have in order to really catalyze the ecosystem around them. And so it's up to the incubators and accelerators to decide, how they want to use that funding. But ultimately, it's really to support the startups and the incubators around them to do some great things. There's examples of folks who've used the $50,000 prize that was done in the first round and actually use it to catalyze their own prizes so that they can support startups and incubators to come up with new business plans, right? There's others who are actually doing real technical work with the startups and within their accelerators and incubators in order to help drive towards commercialization. And so really it's around anything that those incubators and accelerators can do to catalyze the region around them is the point of this.
All right. Could you also describe the ripple effect of the recent infrastructure bill's passage? How might that particularly impact Department of Energy labs, whether it's an outright additional funding, or I'm thinking more so particular requests slash directives as to what kind of projects the administration, the Biden administration, would like to see the Department of Energy focusing on?
Gosh, that's a big question. I think the thing that we're extremely excited about is that this is the most momentous time for the Department of Energy in terms of the investment in the department, the kinds of works that we're doing. What you will see if you actually spend some time looking at the bipartisan infrastructure law is there's a lot of focus right now on demonstrations, which I think is really, really critical. I mentioned earlier in my talk how demonstration funding is oftentimes difficult to get because of the fact that it's much riskier capital. And so there's a lot of money going towards demonstrations, which is really going to catalyze some incredible commercialization opportunities for our technologies. And there's so many things going on right now. It's like the most exciting time to be at the DOE. It really is.
All right. Now, let me check. Thank you. Then there's a couple of questions that have come in. Question here from David saying, user facilities typically award time based on breakthrough research rather than technology maturation. How can user facilities help in your efforts then? Yeah.
So user typically award time based on breakthrough research rather than, I'm not sure what they mean by award time.
Think of, say, the amount of access, or particularly if you're talking about a beamline. I know that's often how your project proposal comes in, and you will need this many months or literally this many hours.
Okay. Got it. Yep. In our research group, when I was at MIT, spent a lot of time at Brookhaven using the beamline there. So I understand the question now. Yeah. So user facilities, there's actually a very healthy external user group for our facilities, especially ones that have to do with the nanofabrication, things like that, because there's a lot of researchers throughout the nation that don't have access to this high-end facilities that we have. And so really what folks are doing is actually going there, and there are programs to actually allow people to do work in those facilities that have to do with technology maturation. When I had a chance to visit 5 of our 17 national labs and actually met companies that were doing research in partnership with the labs. And so really, I think the key is the way in which user facilities can help in our efforts is ensuring that the private sector is having access to the incredible assets that we have in our user research facilities. And that was one of the reasons why we have the lab partnering service, is if you go there, external users can see all the facilities that we have that they potentially can access and reach out to the facilities to see if they can partner with both the researchers as well as the assets to do the work that they want to do.
Okay. So we'll look even further into some of the lab partnering service. There's a question from Joshua about what degree does the OTT jointly develop IP with grantees? Where does the gray area get into there as to who owns
So think
the
of,
IP?
yeah. So think of OTT, it's funny, I'm a former McKinsey partner, and I talk about how OTT in many ways is like an internal consulting firm, in the sense that I don't own the people, I don't own the labs, I don't own even the research dollars, right? So really what we're trying to do here is help to catalyze the way in which DOE, the people within DOE, the money and so forth is being used in a way to drive us towards commercialization. So as such, we're creating processes to help facilitate the licensing of IP and help facilitate the development of IP. And so we ourselves are not the inventors, we're doing more the facilitations. And so really the grantees may be working in partnerships with the national lab researchers, and those folks would have, joint IP, but OTT really is more of a process facilitator and a program facilitator versus a co-inventor. Although sometimes when I talk to people, I can't help myself, I'm like, oh, have we thought of this? But really, that's not our official role.
All right. Let me bring up what Victoria had asked, is how can user facilities encourage and promote tech transfer and commercialization? What might be that messaging role from the user facility side?
Hey, Victoria, nice to see you. So in terms of user facilities and the way they can encourage it, I really think it's around messaging and also explaining ways in which their facilities have led to commercialization impacts. I will say that, oftentimes people are not familiar with all the great work that has been done that has led to commercial impact. And so I think if the user facilities can tell the stories around how they've led to some real commercial impacts, I think that would be helpful. And also, one of the things that I'm excited about too is, ways in which we might be able to provide, say, small business vouchers or things like that to encourage people to come in to use the facilities from the external outside world. I think anything we can do to bring the external entities into user research facilities is really important. So for example, the Advanced Manufacturing Office has a wonderful program, which is called LEAP, the Lab Embedded Entrepreneurship Program. And there are several LEAP nodes across the DOE lab complex. And there, what they do is they fund startups 2 years to actually come into the labs to work on their startup. And so what that does is it gives some cross-fertilization of the external world, and the startups get a chance to use the facilities as well as interact with the researchers that are there who are world-class. And so doing more things like that, I think, will promote technology transfer and commercialization. So it's really the pathways with the private sector are where we can really see some of that stuff sing.
Could you say a little more about that? I'm thinking of an anecdote, an example of an impressive startup that is either in the works or that has basically spun out and is the kind of highlight that you like to bring up when people ask, so what are you doing with taxpayer dollars? That kind of question. Is there a favorite startup that's—
No, it's like asking who's my favorite kid.
Yeah, I shouldn't say favorite.
I'm not going there, but I think the key here is take a look at the LEAP programs. They'll have a lot of their own stories there, but in the end, it's really around how do we drive those pathways, and that's really, really important.
Great. All right. Last call for any other questions. I know you're very busy, and we appreciate getting your insights and time for a short window today. Looks like thank you then. On behalf of the audience here and the SURF Network, really appreciate the work you're doing, the vision that you have, how you just explained this. We will share this discussion with our network as well, and this can also help prompt some of SURF's strategic engagements in 2022, particularly in this helping to message out these programs and how different technologists and scientists can become involved with all these different DOE facilities. Thank you, Dr. Chan.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for having me here, Dan, and I wish you the best holidays and look forward to seeing all the great work that you guys are doing.
All right. Thank you again. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for a short window today. There'll be more webinars to come in 2022. Have a great holiday, everybody.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.